Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it another minute or two as we get some extra people joining, and then we'll get started. Okay. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to join this session titled "Beyond Free Fruit in the Staff Room: A Strategic Approach to Wellbeing." So, we're going to be spending a little bit of time today talking about kind of what a strategic approach to well-being looks like and how to develop that in your organizations. So just before we kind of dive in and get started, just to do a quick introduction to us. So I think having seen the kind of the attendee list for this, I think there's quite a few people who we know or are familiar with Atkinson HR. But for those who aren't, we are a strategic HR consultancy business. We've been going for about 7 years now, and our kind of work is focused around helping values-led organizations become even better employers. So we're a small team. There's about 12 of us in the team. We really kind of are passionate about the voluntary sector, collectivism, diversity and inclusion, and we work predominantly with charities across the UK, not exclusively. And we are kind of partners with NCVO and Akivo in terms of our work with the voluntary sector. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, then, so we are going to be talking a little bit about why staff wellbeing is so crucial. We're going to be talking a bit about culture, psychological safety and resilience. We're going to be talking about what kind of interventions support good wellbeing and about how we get the right support structures in place to kind of support and develop our staff in terms of wellbeing. Um, there's probably about 30 minutes worth of content that I'm going to be talking through and sharing with you. There'll be a couple of points kind of during the session where I just ask you to pause for a couple of minutes and to kind of reflect and maybe share some of your thoughts in the chat as well. There won't be any kind of interactive part of the session where we do group work or anything like that. So that's the plan for the next kind of 40 minutes or so. So I guess what I'd like you to start with, and again, what I'd like everyone to do is just take 1 minute just to reflect on this question. So why is staff well-being so crucial? Why is this important? And then when you've taken a minute to think about it, again, if you've got thoughts on this, I'd like you to share those thoughts in the chat, please. So just take a minute to reflect and then share your thoughts in the chat. Okay, great, fantastic. So there's some really good responses there in the chat. So thank you for sharing those. Lots in there about kind of happy staff are effective. Lots in there about how kind of have taken a really positive, proactive approach to well-being can help in terms of retention, engagement, kind of performance of staff. So some great reasons there. I'm just going to talk through kind of some of those in a little bit more detail to share. I suppose the rationale, the business case about why this is so important and why I think organisations should be taking kind of staff well-being really seriously. So I guess quite a few of you have alluded to the business case around well-being. So again, some of these headlines, some of these stats will be of no surprise. There is a really kind of growing wealth of evidence that shows both the benefits of good well-being and workplaces that really effectively promote well-being, exactly like you say, in terms of engagement, performance, satisfaction, kind of employer brand, and what that says about the organization, ability, and therefore impacting on the ability to recruit talent as well. Also, lots of evidence about the negative impact, the damage that can be caused by a workplace environment with poor well-being. So the economic cost of that, the cost in terms of loss of productivity, the cost in terms of the impact on managers and the ability to deliver effectively in terms of your work. This session is being recorded, by the way, so you can revisit any of this, and also we're really happy to share the slides. So if you want to kind of check out and read a little bit more about any of these kind of statistics or research that underpins this, kind of really happy to share that. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with the expression VUCA, which talks about kind of, I suppose, the unpredictability and the challenge that is being described to be happening in the world around us and our broader environment. So again, like I say, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So this idea that kind of in a world and environment where it is arguably more challenging than ever before in terms of our work. So the kind of volatility, the volatility of the kind of wider world, the uncertainty, the complexity, the challenge that brings. And what that means is that, there is therefore a real kind of increased importance and emphasis in terms of the role of workplace well-being and how do we support people to be able to thrive? How do we support people to be able to be well, kind of at work and to healthy, both mentally and physically, in order to have the resilience to kind of manage those external factors? There is also, so I'm sure you're all familiar with VUCA. You might be less familiar with this alternative model, which is has been coined relatively recently, which is called BANI. BANI is basically saying, because VUCA is not kind of challenging enough, it doesn't adequately reflect the chaos that's happening in the world around us. So rather than volatile, it describes the environmental circumstances being brittle, rather than uncertain as anxious, rather than complex, non-linear, rather than ambiguous, incomprehensible. I guess this is just another way of framing the challenge that people face in a workplace and an environment where kind of there's so much going on that's outside of our control. Okay. And then finally, in terms of why well-being is really important, I think, again, I'm all for organizations making a really clear business case and understanding kind of the importance and impact that a positive approach to well-being can have. But I think also there is just the moral and ethical case as well, which is, because we can. Employers are situated in a position where we can have a really positive impact on people's health and well-being, where we, an average person spends 90,000 hours of their life at work, which is quite a lot. And so why wouldn't we, if we're in a position where we have the power, where we have the resources, where we have the capability to have a really positive impact on kind of people's well-being and health and mental health, why wouldn't we choose to do that? So I think that can often be understated as well, and I think it's important to hold on to that. Okay, so I think some key questions then in terms of developing our work and developing a kind of strategy, these are the kind of questions that I think I would be asking. So if you're in a situation where you're thinking in your workplace, right, we need to develop a really clear approach to well-being. We've accepted the business case. We understand why it's important. So what do we do? I think these are some questions that are hopefully useful to you in starting to think about that. Okay, so my starting point in general will be what kind of culture and environment do we need to support good mental health? What interventions will make a difference? What support do we need for staff who are experiencing problems? So what are those kind of interventions? What's the safety net? What support can we provide when it's not going well or when people need help? And then what kind of training and development do we need to do to build the confidence and capacity of people? What are what upskilling do we need to do in terms of building the capability of our wider team? So I think I'd like to start in terms of culture then. So again, I think this idea of what kind of culture do we have? Do we have a culture which is conducive to really great well-being? And how do we know that? So, when we're talking about culture, I'm typically talking about kind of the values, beliefs, attitudes, systems that kind of that reflect what it's like to work in an organization, or put more simply, the way we do things around here. So again, I'm going to ask you just to do a kind of a piece of reflection individually, where again, I just want you to spend a couple of minutes thinking about two things. So firstly, I'd like you all to think about what are the characteristics of a culture that supports and promotes good staff well-being, and how do you know? So then I'd like you to think just again for another minute about what do you do to know if kind of your culture is supporting, if it is underpinning a really good well-being culture within your organization. So take 2 minutes on that. And then again, if you've got kind of any key reflections that you'd like to share in chat for the wider group, kind of I think people really value that and appreciate that. Just another 20 seconds to reflect and share any thoughts, and then we'll get going. Okay, great. We'll get going again. Again, some really kind of fantastic reflections and comments in the chat there, and hopefully that's helpful, kind of thinking through kind of what you'd be expecting to see in this kind of culture. Again, here's some kind of suggestions around the type of culture that's likely to be kind of conducive to great well-being and great mental health as part of that. I think these are the kind of things that you'd be looking for. I mean, sounds like a nice place to work, doesn't it? It sounds like a nice organization if that's the kind of feedback and comments that you're getting. And then how do we know? Well, again, obviously there's some kind of standard indicators in here. So things like staff surveys, listening exercises, exit interviews, observations, but really importantly, I think kind of discussing and naming the culture as well. It's very easy in organizations to take the culture for granted. But I think one of the things that can be useful in an exercise like this, so again, if you're developing a well-being strategy and you're thinking, right, we want to ensure that our culture promotes and fosters positive well-being, good well-being, what are the words that we want people to describe our culture with? How would they describe our culture now? And how would we want our culture to be described in the future? What are the words, what are the descriptors that we would want people to be saying about our culture and working environment? I really like the point, somebody, there's a couple of really good points that have come up in kind of in the chats. One is, it's all well and good having kind of exit interviews or staff surveys, but if they're just tick box exercises, it doesn't do anybody any good, because all you're doing is you're taking everybody's time to gather that feedback. So there's got to be a genuine kind of capacity and intent to use some of that data to kind of inform your practice and really think through, right, what does this mean? How are we going to kind of respond to this? What action do we need to take if we want to kind of improve and develop this in the future? There's another really good point as well made, which is around health and safety, and I suppose physical safety. Like, I'm going to talk quite a lot in this session around mental health and well-being, but obviously kind of physical health and safety is really important as part of that too. And I think kind of physical and psychological safety or go kind of hand in hand as part of this, creating a really positive well-being culture and environment. Okay. Kind of still on the topic of kind of culture, then really is a question around psychological safety. So again, hopefully, I'm sure plenty of you have heard the expression psychological safety, coined by Amy Edmondson, with the definition, and this would be the definition that Amy Edmondson kind of shared around psychological safety. So this concept of psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of the team that it's okay to take risks, to express their ideas and concerns, to speak up. So again, creating an environment, creating a culture and a space where people know it's okay to ask questions, know it's okay to take risks, know to take appropriate risks, know it's okay to kind of admit mistakes, safe in the knowledge that that's going to be treated as kind of learning opportunities. And again, I think I think it's a great framing around around culture and the kind of workplace environment that we want to create. Um, Again, stacks and stacks of evidence that show that in environments that are characterized by high levels of psychological safety, we know that leads to higher levels of engagement, more motivated teams, better decision making, and a culture of continuous learning and improvement. And the evidence shows and supports that. So I guess one of the key questions again then is, how do you know whether you have psychological safety in your team? And again, these are 7 questions that, if you're going to be thinking about well-being in your workplace, thinking about kind of developing a well-being strategy, I think these are really great questions to kind of ask and reflect on and think about how you would then answer them in the context of your organization. Maybe even ask, colleagues kind of to answer these questions for you, to give you a sense of to what extent you do have a culture which is underpinned by psychological safety. And again, it comes back to, do people feel that they can make mistakes and it's not held against them? Are they able to bring up problems and tough issues? Is there an environment that embraces difference and diversity? Can people take risks? Are people able to ask each other for help? Do people feel that they're operating in an environment where kind of people are supporting rather than undermining their efforts? And do people feel that the skills and talents are valued? If you're able to answer yes to all of those questions, or most of them, then I think you're probably coming from a really good starting point in terms of an environment where there are kind of high levels of psychological safety that underpin some of your work. Okay. My next question then is what is resilience? And again, I don't know about you, but this is one of those words. So we occasionally get asked to work with organizations to deliver resilience training. And it's one of those words which makes me kind of shudder a little bit, I think. My initial response is like, right, okay, tell me a little bit about what you mean by resilience to kind of understand that. Because I think in my experience, resilience is one of those expressions which can be helpful, but also can be used in a way that's really unhelpful. So what do we mean by the word resilience? I'll tell you what we don't mean by it. So we don't mean this. So it's absolutely not kind of suck it up, buttercup. It is, resilience is about building, when it's used effectively and when it's helpful in the context of well-being. I think when we're talking about resilience, what we mean is, how do we create a setup where employees and teams feel stable, secure, capable of kind of assessing and taking on difficult situations and adapting to challenges. It's absolutely not about expecting people to cope with more, push on, bounce back, just get on with it. Yeah. It's absolutely not about expecting people to remain positive or pretending to be okay when they're not okay, when they're stressed, when they're facing challenges or difficult times. And it's not about being overly tolerant or putting up with stuff when people shouldn't, putting up with poor behaviors or not addressing kind of concerns that they have. So I think, again, when it's helpful, resilience is about creating the conditions where people feel safe, so that even when difficult situations arise or challenges arise, that they've got a better chance of maintaining more of their confidence, more of their effectiveness, and more of the motivation during those stressful times. So again, if you're thinking about resilience in the context of your well-being strategy, I'd really kind of encourage you to think carefully about how you frame in that, and what you mean by kind of building resilience within your team. Okay, so what are the right interventions? We're getting into, I guess, the so what of the session now. So moving on from culture and moving on from kind of psychological safety and resilience, what are the things that you can do as an organization which which might help kind of create that culture, which might help give your people the right skills and confidence in terms of developing an environment that is really supportive of great well-being. So, our top tips here are free fruit in the kitchen, at desk massages, table foosball, staff barbecues, yoga sessions, and a great policy, or not. So again, these are all nice things, right? These are all things that, if your employer, if your organization does these, then great. That's really good. I think my kind of challenge and pushback on this is if this is all you're doing, then there's maybe some underlying kind of considerations there. And I think it's really important for us to think about kind of some of the root causes and core issues that are going to create a positive well-being environment. So, I'm not slagging you off if you do yoga sessions for staff. That's great, but really important to think about what kind of underpins that and what goes alongside that in terms of your well-being strategy. So I've got 5 ideas here. Again, just to frame these are just suggestions. These are ideas. One of the things I hope is that all of you leave this session with perhaps 2 or 3 ideas for things that you might be able to try or test in your organization. Not all of these will be applicable for every organization. So I think it's important that you view them through your own context and framing. Okay. So number 1, I mean, again, this is quite commonly used, this expression, isn't it? That people don't leave their job, they leave the boss. Again, we know from evidence, and I know from my experience working with lots of organizations around people management and HR, how important the quality of management is in terms of whether somebody is able to thrive in their work, whether somebody is able to develop, whether somebody is able to be happy, whether somebody is able to be well in their work, and also the damaging impact that poor management can have. And again, it's really interesting, isn't it? So the number of organizations that we work with a lot of organizations where kind of being a manager is difficult. I hear all the time, I've got to have one-to-ones, I've got to have performance reviews, I've got to give feedback. How do I find time to do that when I've already got a really busy job? And again, I think for me, management is often one of those things that appears to be quite undervalued in organizations. So I think, again, one of the key suggestions is really think about how do we help our managers to ring fence time, to protect time, to be outstanding managers. It's not a bolt onto their job. It's not an addition. It's not like the bottom line on the job description, which is like any other duties. Like, being a great people manager is really important because of the compound impact it has on your organization and on the team. So I think, these are the kind of things that I would expect to see great managers doing, regular check-ins, one-to-ones, demonstrating genuinely human-centered leadership where they're interested in the people and they're adapting their approach based on the needs of individuals. I would expect great managers to be able to spot the signs when things aren't okay. Again, managers have enough to do. I don't expect every manager to be able to be a counselor, but I do expect managers to be able to spot the signs and think, actually, I can see that you're demonstrating some of the signs of being in conflict or not being okay. Let's have a conversation about that. Let's talk about whether there's anything we can do to help or support that. I think great managers are proactively encouraging healthy habits, whether that's in terms of work-life balance, whether it's around whether that's around work-life balance, whether it's about boundaries for people, whether it's about kind of some of their in working behaviors. But encouraging kind of positive, healthy habits as part of that, and just being there, being open, being accessible, being ready to listen when the people need them to listen. But I think from an organizational perspective, really thinking through What do we need to do to give managers capacity to do this? What do we need to do to give managers the skills to do this? What can we do with our managers to make it clear that these are our expectations? That if you're a people manager in this organization, this is what we're looking to see from you in terms of really performing effectively. Okay, number two, manageable workload. Again, this is key. And we work with quite a lot of charities. I'd say 95% of our clients are voluntary sector organizations. And something that we never hear is our clients saying to us, yeah, we've got loads of capacity, we've got loads of time, we're not busy at all. Like, that's a conversation that never happens. And also, typically, the organizations that we worked with are rammed full of people who care, who are passionate, who want to do great work, who have a connection often to the cause of the organization. So a really kind of deep alignment with the purpose of their organization, which is fantastic. One of the flip sides in terms of the other side of the coin of that is sometimes it means that people can struggle to put up the right boundaries in place, or sometimes people can struggle to switch off from their work. So I think, again, as part of a well-being strategy, if you're looking to take a really kind of effective approach, I'd be really thinking about your workload planning. So how do you have a really clear strategy? How do you operationalize that in terms of effective plans? And what do you do to prioritize? Again, there's an expression that I probably overuse in a lot of my conversations with people, but strategy is about choice ultimately, and it's really easy to decide kind of what you want to do that's new. Like when organizations that are developing new strategies often have a million and one ideas about things that they want to do which are exciting and interesting and are going to develop the work. What organizations that I've come across are typically terrible at when they're developing strategy is deciding what they're going to stop. It's that thing which is, okay, well, we want to do all this new stuff. What are we going to stop doing that's going to allow us to do that? So I think really thinking through whether your plans are realistic, whether they fully account for business as usual. What do you do to give people permission to prioritize and deprioritize? What do you do to give people autonomy to be able to focus on things that are going to add the most value? How do you help people have really clear kind of boundaries in terms of their work to be able to switch off when they need to switch off, and to have that kind of an appropriate distinction in terms of the role that work plays within their life, and just kind of really clear and simple planning processes as well that underpin that. Okay, we are going to move on now to talking about conflict resolution. Again, one of the things that I think it's probably fair to say I've seen an increase in this over the past 5 years, probably for a number of reasons, some related to kind of COVID perhaps as well, and workplace norms and standards and hybrid working. I think it's really important, again, in building a strategic approach to wellbeing, to think about how you deal and how you handle with conflict in the workplace. So having a really proactive approach, which includes kind of clearly articulating your values and behavior standards. So, competency frameworks used to be the norm and used to be kind of in vogue a while ago, and we still see quite a few of them. But actually, we're seeing more and more organizations now, rather than having detailed competency frameworks, having kind of values and behaviors frameworks. So much more simple statements around, these are our organization's values that we expect colleagues to share and demonstrate. These are the behaviors that really bring these values to life. These are the behaviors that we want to avoid in our workplace. And again, really clearly articulating that and really effectively linking it to the different stages of your HR processes. So whether that's when you're recruiting people, when you're developing performance, when you're looking at learning development plans, really thinking about how they bring your values to life in terms of expected behaviors. Um, Really trying to foster an open feedback culture within your organization, giving people the tools to give and receive feedback well. And of course that goes hand in hand with the conversation around psychological safety, ensuring that people feel safe to do that. Um, Being really proactive in addressing poor behaviors quickly, and calling them out or calling them in and having conversations and giving that feedback. Also being willing to use mediation where it's right to use mediation. Again, I think um, again, mediation is really interesting and I think is a really important tool when used in the right way. Sometimes I've seen again, when we get asked about mediation, the first question I generally ask, is around the situation and whether it's about trying to fix the relationship. Because if you're in a situation where kind of a relationship has genuinely broken down and that's causing workplace conflict and tension, then mediation can be a really powerful tool. Equally, organizations sometimes need to be a bit clearer in actually just challenging poor behaviors, because sometimes I've seen situations where somebody's behaving poorly, that's causing some tension, and the answer in that situation is not mediation, it's give that person the feedback. If the observation, if the assessment is that the behaviors are just not okay, you don't need a mediator to say that, just give the feedback. Then the other things that, again, really important. So we know that one of the things that has a very direct and tangible impact in terms of well-being is how people feel about their work. So we know that if people feel that they have meaningful work that is appropriate and is aligned with the strategy, then they're more likely to be well at work, and that's more likely to create an environment where they can thrive. So again, think about what you can do to make sure there's that golden thread between the organization's vision, your purpose, and the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. Try and align projects to people's talents and strengths. Promote collaboration within your workplace. Give permission to people to make the work a craft. What I mean by this is enable people to be experts at what they do. So as part of the development of your colleagues, have those conversations around how can we really build your expertise in this area. You're a specialist in this. What can I do to really support you in terms of being the go-to person, having the knowledge so that you really excel in this area. And again, when I'm talking about a double-edged sword, I'm coming back to my comments earlier around how sometimes there can be a boundaries issue around where people care so much about their work, about the cause. Sometimes they find it hard to leave that behind. Really important in those conversations, in those situations, to have the conversations about boundaries and barriers. Okay, and then finally, again, one of the things that we're seeing a lot more organizations focus on, which is really healthy, I think, is how do we really embed a coaching culture within our organization? So how do we give people the tools to coach, both formally and informally, right? How do we enable people to and empower people to solve their own problems and to be creative, rather than kind of management or senior leadership kind of always being the people who things get escalated to when there needs to be a solution or a problem solved. So really trying to encourage an environment where people are able to ask those questions and coach each other kind of informally. So there's 5 tips which I hope are helpful in terms of kind of really kind of substantive issues to think about when you're looking at taking a kind of strategic approach to well-being. I guess in terms of the support structures that go around that, then I guess just a couple of things to add to what I've already said. So even in an environment where you have high levels of psychological safety and where you're doing those things that I've just described in terms of a well-being strategy, there will still be occasions where people are not okay, either because of their work or because of stuff going on in other parts of their life, or maybe a combination of those factors. So I think also having the safety net, the support structure in place to help with that is really important. I think most organizations will have some form of employee assistance program. If not, again, really ask yourself that question: where do people go when they're experiencing mental health challenges? What is their route to support? Um, One of the classic things we see in organizations, and again, this is if you've got an EAP, one thing that I can encourage you to do now is no matter how well you think you've promoted it or communicate it, do it more. It's the kind of thing where, you know, I often see organizations who maybe tell people during their induction and then never mention it again, or it's something that's just used, if we're doing a reorganization process, there's a line in the at risk of redundancy letter that says, don't forget about the EAP. Really think about how you promote it proactively to encourage people to use that. And again, if you've got a good EAP provider, they'll support with that. Like they will help you in terms of thinking about how you promote the service, how you promote the offer, and how you encourage people to use it. And they'll often give you statistics as well in terms of the extent to which people are using. Think about the training as well. So again, what can we do to really upskill managers, to upskill colleagues, so that they can spot the signs when things aren't okay for their colleagues? And again, this is not about training people as counsellors. Not all of our staff want to be counsellors. Not all of our people have the right skills to be counsellors. So making sure you're clear about roles, responsibilities, expectations in terms of what a referral looks like when somebody kind of discloses that they're not okay or that they're struggling. And then how do you suppose? So again, for those of you working in organizations where you have staff who may be in a situation where they're giving advice to others, where they're handling particularly sensitive situations, where they're dealing with high levels of conflict, maybe where they're exposed to elements of trauma, then really think about what you're doing in a more structured way to support those staff. It may be that some of those employees in certain roles may benefit from access to kind of more formal clinical supervision as part of that. So we're getting to the end now. I've just got a couple more slides after this. So again, I'm going to ask you for the last time just to kind of pause and reflect. So based on everything that I've shared, the ideas, those conversations around kind of developing a wellbeing strategy, I'd like you all just to think about one thing that you would like to do to help improve staff wellbeing in your organization. Again, if you'd like to share that to help kind of inspire others and on the call and give other people ideas, really happy for you to share in the chat. But I'm just going to be silent for 1 minute and give you a bit of space to think. Okay, that's fantastic, and keep on posting those of you who are typing, but some really good kind of ideas there. So just to kind of move to wrapping up then. So again, just for those of you thinking about next steps, here are some things that you might want to consider as kind of tangible kind of takeaways from this. So remember, it's not about gimmicks, it's about sustainable interventions and structures. Think about leadership buy-in. in your organization. So what can you do to help ensure that leaders in your organization are on the same page, and that they're going to consistently role model and promote kind of the right kind of culture and environment. Again, one of the practical things that hopefully most of you could do straight away is thinking about, right, what do we do to develop our managers and staff in this space, and how do we have clear expectations about their roles in terms of promoting well-being, and reflecting on how you ensure people see the meaning in their work. And then what do you do to spot whether or not you have a culture that helps or hinders kind of well-being in the workplace. Here are some resources. So again, we'll share this slide deck. So some links here to some different articles, tools, blogs about kind of workplace well-being, and kind of guidance on kind of developing that and developing a well-being strategy. So thank you very much. That's taken about 50 minutes. I'm just going to pause, and again, I'm very happy. We've probably got about 5 minutes if anybody's got any questions. So you should have access to the Q&A function. So if anybody has any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to pop them in that Q&A tab, or in the chat. Either is absolutely fine. Thanks. Yeah. Okay. So I can't see any questions, or I can't see any questions coming in. So I think we will park it there. Again, you all know where we are. So if there's anything, if you're in the process of developing your wellbeing strategy, and have any questions or things that you'd like any advice on, feel free to get in touch at any time. But it's been really enjoyable. I hope you found it useful. I hope you take away some kind of ideas from that session. Take care and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week. Thank you. Bye now. Bye.